Chapter 1, The Conference Begins. Against the backdrop of a modern conference center, with its glass facades glittering and the evening lights of the metropolis reflecting, a meeting began that could change the usual perception of journalism and public debate. In a spacious room, where high ceilings created an atmosphere of grandeur and opportunity, leading experts, scientists, businessmen and young talents gathered. Everyone was here expecting to hear words that could inspire and awaken new ideas, and the air was filled with excitement and anticipation of change. It was in this environment, filled with intellectual energy, that the two main characters of this story first appeared, an ambitious journalist who decided to test the reputation of the young Barron Trump, and Barron himself, a young representative of the famous dynasty, who in a short time had already managed to establish himself as a witty and erudite speaker. The suited reporter strode confidently through the halls of the convention center, her eyes searching for a story and her tone promising provocative questions. Her reputation as a bold interviewer unafraid to ask tough questions preceded her, and many expected her to pry into Barron's past, asking questions about his parents and family traditions that might cast doubt on his personal worth. She believed that a famous name obligated one to answer questions, and that true heritage always had dark sides best left unspoken. Meanwhile, Barron Trump, young and confident, was already taking his place at the front of the room, his calm face and confident gaze indicating that he was prepared for everything that the program had to offer. His presence not only attracted attention, but also commanded respect. Despite his young age, he possessed a wealth of erudition, which he had accumulated over years of reading, research, and observation of the modern business world. His demeanor, calmness, and easy smile gave the impression that he knew more than his age would suggest and was ready to meet any challenge with the composure of a true professional. When the moment came for the official program to begin, the halls of the convention center filled with the sounds of applause and the buzz of conversation. The event's leading organizers appeared on stage, introducing the key speakers, and soon the voice of one of the organizers announced the start of the interview with Barron Trump. The journalist, clutching the microphone in her hand, walked onto the stage with a confidence that promised her a sensation. Her gaze, full of determination and subtle irony, sought an opportunity to ask questions that could reveal unexpected details about the biography of the young representative of the famous dynasty. In the first few minutes of the interview, she asked general questions about current projects and the company's future, but then she smoothly moved on to more personal topics, unexpectedly turning the conversation toward Barron's parental figures. Her questions were pointed and provocative, as if she were deliberately trying to hit a soft spot, using rhetorical devices to push him over the edge of an emotional reaction. But Barron's reaction was different. Instead of being embarrassed or outraged, he responded with surprising clarity and logic, making arguments backed by facts and analysis. His answers were measured as if he had foreseen in advance what questions might be asked and had prepared answers that would not only protect his honor, but also add to his respect in the eyes of the audience. As the audience listened attentively to his every word, the tension grew, and the public began to realize that young Trump was not just the heir to a great dynasty, but a true professional, capable of defending his views and protecting the family dignity with sincere pride. The atmosphere on stage changed. The journalist's initial intention to get a sensation was leveled by his composure and deep knowledge. Already at that moment, a premonition arose that today's interview would turn the expectations of many upside down, and that true mastery lies not in provocation, but in the ability to conduct a dialogue at the highest level. Thus began a fateful meeting at a conference where two different positions, journalistic courage and the erudition of the young Barron, collided in the first act, foreshadowing the coming battle of ideas that promised to be the highlight of the evening. Already in the first minutes of their conversation, the audience understood that today would not be just a series of questions and answers, but a real test of rhetoric, intellect and human dignity, which would determine which of them would emerge victorious in this tense clash of views. Chapter 2, Challenge and Tricky Questions. As the applause from the opening remarks continued to reverberate through the room, the journalist, known for her brashness and courage, stepped forward and approached the microphone. Her eyes were gleaming with determination, and her voice was firm as she began asking questions about Barron Trump's personal history. From the very beginning, her questions were not just provocative, they delved into the heart of his biography, forcing him to consider that there was more to him than just the glitter of his famous name. She began with a question about his parents, arguing that family ties are often the key to understanding character and business decisions, and that the past, no matter how glorious, can hide unexpected secrets. The room, full of attention and anticipation, held its breath as her voice, sharp and insightful, carried across the stage. Every word she said was carefully considered. She cited statistics, referred to biographies of famous figures, and even mentioned rumors circulating in narrow circles. Her questions sounded as if she was trying to show that even representatives of influential dynasties can have dark pages in their family history, and that the true personality emerges precisely in times of crisis. "How can you justify the decisions your parents made when it came to business?" she asked, clearly intending to uncover some hidden truth. Her tone was at once challenging and revealing, and many expected young Barron to crumble under such pressure. But Barron's response was quite different from what her audience had anticipated. Despite the provocative nature of the questions, he remained calm and composed. His voice, quiet but confident, sounded like the confident answer of a man who knows the value of every word. He began to answer, citing specific facts and explaining that the past is a complex and multifaceted phenomenon that cannot be reduced to simple labels or unambiguous assessments. He spoke of how his parents made decisions based on the circumstances of the time, and that many of these decisions can only be understood in context. Historical realities in which they lived. Each of his answers was constructed logically and restrainedly, as if he had foreseen in advance that the journalist's questions could touch on personal matters, but was ready to defend his point of view. The scene grew increasingly tense as the reporter continued to ask tricky questions, trying to keep Barron on topic, while he, on the contrary, confidently answered, using arguments supported by facts and personal experience. His answers not only refuted unfounded assumptions, but also emphasized his deep erudition and maturity. He talked about how family values shape a person, but at the same time are not a guarantee of perfection, and that each person is responsible for their actions, regardless of ancestry. "Every story has its own nuances," he said, "and my answers are based not on a desire to hide the truth, but on the understanding that the truth is multi-layered." His words became a mirror, reflecting not only facts, but also life experiences that cannot be measured by simple numbers or sensational statements. In the room, the audience began to change. Those who expected an emotional reaction or a defensive stance were instead treated to a calm, almost philosophical performance by the young Trump. His confidence and ability to construct his answers logically made the interview a real lesson in rhetoric and intellectual confrontation. Each of his arguments was formulated to not only answer a tricky question, but to show that personal history is a complex process in which the perspective of time and context are important, not just sensational facts. At this point, the atmosphere in the room became tense. But at the same time, it was filled with respect for his manner of conducting the dialogue. Even those who initially supported the journalist began to wonder about her methods and how unethical such questions could be when it comes to such a young man just starting out on his path. His answers not only demonstrated a high level of intelligence, but also made the audience see that true erudition is demonstrated in the ability to withstand even the most provocative questions while remaining true to one's principles. So in this chapter, the clash of views between the provocative journalist and the confident young Trump turned into a real intellectual challenge, where every word mattered and every remark became proof that true strength lies in the ability not only to speak, but also to listen, analyze, and respond with a composure that deserves respect. Chapter 3: The Art of Argumentation. At the moment when the journalist's questions reached the height of their provocativeness, the atmosphere in the room literally began to shimmer with tension and anticipation. Young Barron Trump, who had maintained an amazing composure, began to answer like a conductor confidently directing a symphony of his thoughts. His voice was even and calm, each remark was carefully thought out and logically verified, and each word sounded like an imprint of many years of self-improvement and deep analysis of life experience. He understood that behind the journalist's apparent provocation there was a desire to cause a sensation, and therefore he did not allow himself to fall into an emotional reaction. Instead, he began to talk about the complexities of his family history with such clarity and analyticalness that the audience involuntarily fell silent, listening to his every word. My parents made decisions based on the circumstances of their time, he began calmly, and I have a responsibility to understand their actions in the context of historical realities, not through the prism of today's standards. His words were filled with confident argumentation. He cited examples of how past difficulties forged character and served as a foundation for building the future. Each of his arguments was built on strict logic, based on facts and personal experience, which allowed him to easily point out the relationship between personal qualities and family traditions. Barron deftly switched from one aspect of the question to another, showing that his personal story could not be reduced to simple labels. He described how his parents faced trials, how their decisions, however controversial for some, were driven by the need to survive in the most difficult conditions. He not only defended his ancestry, but also emphasized how experience, even painful ones, becomes the foundation for further growth. The true value of a person lies not in hiding his weaknesses, he confidently declared, but in recognizing them and turning them into a source of strength. It was a challenge to stereotypes, emphasizing that life is made up of difficult decisions that cannot always be assessed superficially. His argument was filled with facts, statistics, and examples from business history. He drew comparisons with other famous dynasties where personal tragedies and trials only served to strengthen family ties and create a unique corporate spirit. Each of his statements was supported by specific examples from his own life, where he talked about how critical moments like today's had tempered his character and taught him to look at the world from a different, deeper perspective. His answers conveyed an inner strength and maturity that reflected not only a high level of education, but also a wealth of life experience gained through constant self-analysis and striving for excellence. His manner of dialogue seemed almost poetic, each word, like a well-honed note, hit the target, and the logic of his reasoning was so precise that even the most tricky questions turned into an opportunity to demonstrate his intellect. He skillfully handled the concept of time, explaining that the past cannot be assessed without taking into account the context, and a true understanding of history is possible only through a deep analysis of all the circumstances surrounding certain events. We cannot judge people only by individual pages of their biography, he said. Each story is a whole novel, where each chapter has its own meaning, and only a holistic view can reveal the true meaning. His words made the audience think about how superficial sensational attempts to reveal the dark sides of a famous name can be if you do not take into account the entire complexity of human destiny. With each subsequent question from the journalist, his answers became more precise and reasoned, and his tone of voice became even calmer and more confident. He showed that instead of responding emotionally, it is worth resorting to logic, facts, and deep analysis, which is capable of dispelling any biased judgments. His speech turned into a real workshop of rhetoric, where every word had weight and every thought a logical completeness. Even those who were initially skeptical could not help but admire his ability to turn tricky questions into opportunities for enlightenment, and provocations into lessons in true argumentation. Thus, in this chapter, Barron Trump demonstrated the art of argumentation that not only protected his personal dignity, but also showed that true erudition and the ability to conduct dialogue can change the perception of even the most complex and provocative topics. His answers became a symbol of the fact that in the modern world, the power of knowledge and the ability to argue can surpass any attempts at manipulation and sensationalization, leaving in the memory of the audience a deep respect for intelligence and human dignity. Chapter 4: The Climax of the Confrontation. In the conference center, where the atmosphere had been tense and expectant, there came a moment when words and looks collided with such force that it seemed as if the entire world was shrinking to the confines of this arena. The spotlights, casting long shadows on the faces of the participants, reflected not only the physical presence but also the emotional tension that was growing with each passing second. On the stage, opposite the stern Secretary of the Treasury, a young Barron Trump, like the embodiment of confidence and freshness, continued to answer questions from a reporter whose voice, at first confident and provocative, gradually began to tremble with the realization of the undeniable logic of his answers. The reporter, not wanting to give in to the scoop, continued to ask tricky questions, trying to find out details that, in her opinion, would reveal the dark side of his parental dynasty. Her words were sharp and deliberately aimed at embarrassing the young Trump, but his answers, based on a deep knowledge of his family history and life's trials, sounded with cool precision. He calmly explained that every decision his parents made, no matter how contradictory it seemed, had its historical justification and reflected the realities of the times in which they lived. His voice, smooth and confident, was a beacon that dispelled the darkness of preconceived notions, and each word, spoken with clear logic, became a blow that could destroy the prejudices gathered around him. At this crucial moment, the room was filled with barely contained energy. The audience, previously divided between the journalist's supporters and the defenders of the young Trump, gradually began to realize that this was not just an interview, but a real intellectual battle, where the power of argumentation outweighed emotional manipulation. Each time the journalist tried to provoke him, he responded as if he had thought out each line in advance. He cited specific examples from family history, mentioned economic realities, and even subtle moments of upbringing that explained why his parents acted the way they did. His answers sounded not only a defense of personal dignity, but also a deep analysis that made the audience think about the complexities of human destiny and the fact that one cannot judge the past without knowing all the nuances. At this critical moment, the journalist seemed to lose her grip, her questions became increasingly rhetorical, her tone less and less confident. Her attempts to paint Barron in a negative light began to anger some in the room. And soon there were quiet murmurs among the audience, discussing how unethical and even cruel it was to ask personal questions. Such a young man. Under the pressure of Barron's logical, precise and thoughtful answers, her arguments lost their force, and the very fact of trying to ask questions of an intimate nature raised more and more questions from those present. Each of her remarks, as if an echo of the previous aggression, gradually turned into a powerless echo, unable to compete with the power of a reasonable and balanced answer. Finally, when the discussion reached its climax, and Barron's final remark sounded with unwavering confidence, a silence filled with the realization of the victory of reason over aggression hung in the room. The audience, realizing that the young Trump had not only managed to defend his honor, but also convey to everyone the essence of complex family and economic issues, began to applaud standing. Even those who had previously supported the journalist could not help but admit that Barron's arguments were so precise and well-constructed that they evoked deep respect for his erudition and maturity. At this point, the tension building up in the room gave way to sincere admiration, and the journalist's provocative questions seemed devoid of any basis and even cruel. Thus, the culmination of the confrontation became the starting point for rethinking not only personal history, but also the principles that guide the leading minds of our time. This intellectual battle, where emotions gave way to logic and deep analysis, demonstrated that the true power of words lies in the ability not to destroy, but to enlighten. On stage, in the spotlight, young Barron Trump showed that even in the most difficult situations it is possible to remain calm, and reason, supported by knowledge, is capable of turning any provocation into a lesson for all present. This culmination became a clear proof that real dialogue is built on mutual respect and a willingness to listen, and that even the most harsh and personal questions should find their answer in the world of truth and deep understanding. Chapter 5: The Victory of Erudition and the Condemnation of Prejudice. As the final notes of the debate faded, the conference room fell into a deep silence that quickly gave way to thunderous applause. Young Barron Trump, cool and confident throughout the interview, emerged victorious in this intellectual confrontation. His answers, built on impeccable logic, were based on facts and personal experience, demonstrating that true erudition can surpass even the most devious attempts at sensationalism. With every word, he not only defended his honor, but also educated the audience, revealing the complexity of family history through the prism of objective analysis and understanding of historical context. The audience, previously divided between supporters of the journalist and defenders of the young Trump, gradually came to a consensus, provocative questions aimed at revealing intimate details of her personal life were not only inappropriate, but also cruel to a man who was just starting out and already had an impressive intellectual base. The audience, realizing that in the world of high standards of public debate, everyone has the right to personal space, soon began to condemn the journalist's methods. Her attempts to provoke an emotional reaction were assessed as biased and even manipulative, which gave rise to a wave of indignation among those present. During the final part of the interview, Barron Trump not only answered all the tricky questions, but also moved the conversation to the plane of constructive dialogue. He emphasized that the personal history of each person is a complex and multifaceted process that requires deep analysis, not superficial judgments. Truth is multilayered, he said, and only through understanding all the nuances can we appreciate the significance of certain events in our lives. These words became key to the entire discussion, allowing the audience to realize that true greatness lies not in the desire to put someone in a negative light, but in the ability to respect everyone's history, even if it is full of contradictions and difficult moments. The journalists present at the conference reacted quickly to what had happened. Within hours of the interview, numerous publications, comments on social networks and analytical articles showed that public opinion had changed dramatically. Many noted that the journalist's methods were inappropriate for discussing such personal topics with a young man who, despite his fame, deserved to be treated with respect. Loud critical voices were heard from all corners, and the topics of sensation and scandal gradually gave way to discussions of intellectual maturity and the ability to conduct a dialogue without humiliation. Barron Trump, maintaining the same confidence he demonstrated throughout the interview, emphasized in his subsequent speeches the importance of critical thinking and respect for personal history. He emphasized that true leaders and innovators know how to learn from the past without allowing emotion to cloud their judgment. His speeches became emblematic of a new phase in public discourse, where questions of personal ethics and respect for human dignity are at the center of attention. Thus, the culmination of the confrontation not only marked the victory of erudition, but also became a lesson for all participants in the debate. The reconciliation of views achieved during the interview paved the way for such discussions to take place in an atmosphere of mutual respect and understanding in the future. The story of this day proved that even in the most heated confrontations, reason and logic can triumph over prejudice and sensationalism. The audience, inspired by the young man's skillful response to provocative questions, understood that true strength lies in the ability to maintain dignity under pressure and respond with firm confidence to any challenge. This victory was not only a personal achievement for Barron Trump, but also an important signal to the entire public. Respect for the individual and deep analysis of the issues must be at the forefront of any discussion. The lesson taught that day will remain in the memory as an example of how constructive dialogue, based on facts and logic, can outperform emotional attacks and destructive attempts at manipulation. Thus, the culmination of this interview marked the beginning of a new era in journalism, where true skill lies not only in asking questions, but also in listening to the answers, allowing each participant to leave the dialogue with a sense of mutual respect and an understanding of the depth of human history.